Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is knit. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we use this verb. The first and most common way that you will likely hear the verb knit used is to mean to make something by interlocking loops of wool or other types of yarn with knitting needles, with needles, or by using a machine. So with this particular verb, I thought it might be helpful to have a picture. So if you look at the bottom right corner of the screen, you should see a great example there. We can see the needles sort of here, right? And we can see a pattern is being made by interlocking these loops. A second and very much related way that you'll hear the verb knit used is to mean to make some type of stitch or maybe a row of stitches by interlocking loops of yarn. A third and maybe less common way to hear the verb knit used is to mean to tighten one's eyebrows, either kind of out of a frown of maybe concentration, so you're really trying to think hard on something, or perhaps it's because you disapprove or you're nervous about something else. I feel like with this third definition, I've most commonly seen it used in literature when someone's trying to tell a story and kind of paint a picture for their reader about what one character looks like as they concentrate or think about something. You might hear them describe the character as knitting their brows or knitting their eyebrows together. You should know that the verb knit is a regular verb. And if we look closely at it, you're going to see that we have a one syllable verb that ends with a consonant, vowel, consonant. And so that's going to require us to double the ending consonant as we attach suffixes or endings to this particular verb. So when I go to make the progressive form, I'm going to double my T and then add ing to form knitting. Knitting. And then to make the past tense, again, I double that T and then I add ed. Our base verb, knit, ends in an unvoiced T sound. So when I add that ed ending, I'm going to add an extra syllable as I say id as I make that past tense or participle form. So it should sound like this: knitted, knitted. And I maybe should have started the video by noting, but you're probably noticing now, our K here is silent in this verb. So we spell it K-N-I-T, but the first sound in this verb is just an N sound. So knit. Now let's take a moment to look at some phrasal verbs with knit. So you might hear knit together. Many times this is used to mean that something is being united or fused. Connected might be another way to kind of think of that. So an example of this: will the bones knit together nicely after a few months? So sometimes in medicine, you'll hear this used kind of, so we're talking about bones healing, fusing back together. Perhaps it's after surgery or time in a cast, who knows? But here we're asking, will they sort of come or fuse back together? Another phrasal verb you might hear is knit up. So it ties back to our first meaning of using needles to make this interlocking pattern. But knit up implies that something is being done very easily or perhaps very quickly, maybe both. So an example of this might be, they knit up mittens for the local shelter every winter. So some people who are very good, very quick, can quickly create things like mittens, and there are various groups that get together to make sure people have warm items, particularly if you're in a colder climate. Now, before we practice with our verb of the day, we're going to talk a little bit about more information questions. So you might see these called WH questions in your textbooks, or you might hear other teachers use that. Great term, because most of these types of questions start with a word that begins with WH. Now, in most of our videos, we talk about affirmative, negative, and yes or no questions. So I do like to occasionally spend some time practicing how we're going to make these types of questions. Today, we're going to focus on the simple present. So here we're asking a question about a habit, a routine, or perhaps a fact. Okay? And you're going to see a pattern here. So we're going to have our question word. Then we use the helping verb do or does. And which form of that depends on our subject, right? So hopefully this chart, you can kind of follow along with me. I'll get my highlighter here. So if I use do, I would use that with a subject of I, you, we, or they, and then I use the base verb. And you might see more information that follows to kind of give the question more context. Now, if my subject is he, she, or it, I'm going to use does. That's going to be my helping verb in that question. So you're welcome, if you'd like, to pause the video here and you can practice making some different questions. We might ask someone, why do they work? Right? So we want to know a reason for something. And again, we can put together many different questions just as examples. But this is the general pattern that we're going to follow to make these simple present questions. And so now let's continue, excuse me, using our verb of the day, knit, and we're going to make a variety of questions in the simple present. We're going to start by asking a question about a location or a place. Okay, so let's take a look. I have the example here. Where, that's my question word that ties to place or location. Where does that group knit each week? I have some friends and family members that really enjoy this activity and they like to get together with other people. Sometimes I'm aware of a group that meets at a library, another group that meets at a coffee shop, right? So here we want to know this particular group, what location are they meeting at? Now, if I want to ask a question about time, I'm going to use the question word when. And this could be like time on a clock, or time as in a date, or a day, a month, even a year. So, an example here. When does she knit? It's a very simple question, but maybe we're sort of asking what her habit is. Does she get up and do it in the morning? Does she do it right before bed? Right? We want to know, when does she generally repeat that action? Now, we can ask questions about the manner in which an action is done. We use the question word how for that. So, I've tried to knit. I'm not very good. So I might ask someone who is experienced at this and knowledgeable, how do you knit a scarf? Right? What is the process? What is the way in which you go about doing this? Another common question you'll hear is to ask the reason an action is being done. So we use the question word why here. So why do they knit so many hats? Right? We kind of want to understand what's the reason. Maybe they're donating it to a group that is in need. Finally, we can ask a question about an object, a thing. We can use the question word what and ask, what does he knit? So here I might be wondering, kind of like, what article of clothing? Is it a sweater? Is it a hat? Is it mittens? Is it a scarf? Right? It could be many things, but I want to know what objects he creates. Now, I hope you'll notice that in these first 5 examples, I'm following my pattern. Question word, then you see do or does, then you see a subject, and you see the base verb. Now, we have two more types of questions where the pattern's just a little bit different. The first is another determiner. So we're asking someone about an object, about a thing. And we can use the question word which. But when we use which, what comes after is sort of like our options or our choices. So we're asking someone to pick from a particular group. So after that, we're going to follow the same pattern then. So you can see this in our question here. Which knitting style do you use? So here I'm asking someone to kind of pick from a particular style. My verb here is really use. I had to kind of break my pattern a bit to come up with a decent example, but it still connects, right? So knitting style here. There are different ways to interlock those loops of yarn, and so here I'm asking someone to pick from those. And then the last type of question we can ask is about the person responsible for a particular action. So we use the question word who, and that question word also serves as the subject. So you're going to see in my example here, I use who, and then because it's a simple present question, I add an S to the end of my verb. Who knits those beautiful sweaters? So I'm asking who is responsible for creating these items. And the answer to this question could be more than one person, but my question who is always going to be singular. So when you're asking a question about a person in the simple present, make sure you're adding an S to the end of your base verb. And you're going to notice there are no helping verbs in this type of question. Now, let's spend a moment looking at some words that are related to our verb knit. And the first word we're going to look at is just the noun form of this word. So, exact same spelling, exact same pronunciation. The noun knit can just refer to some kind of knitted fabric. An example of this might be the shirt is a machine washable knit. So, I'm talking about a type of fabric here. A second way we use the noun knit is just to refer to a garment, an article of clothing that has been made by knitted fabric. So, an example of this, the store is selling 10 new knits for the fall. So, this might be shirts, could be sweaters, could be other pieces of clothing. The next word we'll look at is the noun knitter. This is a person who makes a garment or a piece of clothing by knitting. An example of this might be the group consists of 20 knitters who meet every Wednesday morning. So we're referring to the people who do this activity. A phrase you might hear is describing either close knit or tight knit. Both of these are going to have a similar meaning, but generally we're using it to describe a group of people who have really strong and close relationships. Maybe they have common interests. An example of how you might hear this used. The recent tragedy brought this tight-knit community even closer. So here, tight-knit is describing the community. It's describing this group of people, and it's implying it was there were already very close relationships, common interests, maybe an interest or sort of pride in their city, their neighborhood, whatever this community might be, and now they're being brought closer. So you might help you to sort of picture that idea of knitted fabric or a knitted article, and thinking of people kind of connected or interwoven in a similar way. The last word I'll leave you with today is the noun knitwear. So this is not super common to hear in the United States. I think you might hear it in the UK a little more, but it's used to describe knitted clothing. So you might hear something like this used. It's a new and sustainable knitwear brand. I saw this phrase used to, again, sort of describe a new company who's marketing this product as being more sustainable in its manufacturing or creation than previous brands. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.